Good, because
All
the,
right, this is Board of
athletics
Education
award
meeting
gives them
for
money.
which adequate notice under the Open
So I
Public
don't-
Meetings Act was provided by the written notice on January 3rd, 2019 to the Courier News, Echo Sentinel, Star Ledger, Tappan Warren, and the clerks of the Borough of Watchung and the Townships of Greenbrook, Long Hill, and Warren. Roll call, please, Mr. Stiles.
Mr. Mizio.
Here.
Mr. Fahey.
Here.
Mr. Hayek.
Here.
Mr. Hunsinger.
Here.
Mr. Martins.
Here.
Mr. Morrison.
Here.
Mrs. Ober.
Here.
Dr. Shabilsky.
Here it is.
Mr. Fallon. Dr. Shabilsky.
Here.
And Mr. Fallon. And Ms. Barone.
Here. Please join me for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right, can I have a motion that in accordance with the provisions of the New Jersey Open Public Meetings Act, be it hereby resolved that the board move into executive session to discuss confidential personnel and legal matters, a WHREA grievance, and a WHREA negotiations update, after which action may be taken. It is expected that the matters discussed in executive session will be made public as soon as the need for confidentiality no longer exists.
Second.
All in favor? Aye. All right. Okay, so agenda item number 3, board correspondence. I don't know of any.
Nope.
And so we'll go into reports and presentations, superintendent's comments.
I will keep these brief as the students, hi Chad, welcome, have most of the exciting news to share. But one thing I did want to mention, and it's actually already published in TAP, is that we did get notice last week that we earned the it's the first year of this award from the College Board. We earned the AP Computer Science Female Diversity Award. And that was for our participation in Computer Science A, or Computer Science Principles rather, and the large representation of female students in Computer Science Principles. And our teacher of that course, Lori Piazza, and our supervisor, Dan Twizzler, played a huge role in getting that course going in the district. I believe this current year is our second year of offering it, and we have 5 full sections of that course. So it's become very popular. I guess it's a little bit more reachable for students who may have not done coding before. Computer Science A, you need to have a little bit more of a background, but for Computer Science Principles, it really has a much wider breadth of students with various backgrounds in the course. So that was a nice recognition for our students, and I really credit the teacher who took on the challenge of starting that course. She herself did not have a computer science background. She had taken some computer science courses in college, but she went through a lot of professional development. She, the supervisor, and I actually all went to computer science camp at Whrhs this summer, where we went through some professional development on bringing more computer science and coding to high school. So it was great. So that was a nice thing to note. And our school musical, our spring musical, is coming up this weekend, Fiddler on the Roof. So I encourage everyone to take advantage of seeing that in our amazing Performing Arts Center. Our students always put on a tremendous production. I will say that it will rival any Broadway production that you will see, and it's not nearly as expensive. So come and see it this weekend, Thursday night, Friday night, Saturday matinee, and Saturday evening. Thank you.
Okay, I don't have any comments. So, business administrator comments.
I will hold my comments for the budget discussion.
All right, student representatives comments.
For Math Week, 3 of our students received the perfect score in the February New Jersey Math League contest: Mayur Sharma, Jackie Bhatia, and Felix Wang. Arrowhead editor-in-chief Adnan Contractor published a novel this month. It's called Banana Physics. Approximately 20 students participated in the Junior State of America Winter Conference in Arlington, Virginia from February 22nd to 24th. This JSA Winter Congress brought together Texas and the Mid-Atlantic region, as well as some international schools for a debate competition where students crafted their own bills for passage in the Model Congress. Co-President Jordan Ginsburg won a Best Speaker award.
The annual ALS Talent Show fundraiser took place on Thursday, February 21st at 7 p.m. in the PAC. The Performing Arts Center on Watchung Hills was filled with students, parents, and faculty and community members. Singers, dancers, rock bands, magicians, and yo-yo artists were some of the featured acts. This very successful night not only highlighted the many great talents of the students here at Watchung Hills, but also raised awareness of ALS and generated over $600 for Project ALS. With the winter sports season over, there are a few highlights. The boys basketball team made it to the county finals for the first time since 2008. Our fencing team had an impressive showing at the squad and individual tournament championships. boys team capturing a District 3 Sabre Championship. One swimmer represented Watchung Hills at the Meet of Champions, and our wrestling team had a successful year earning the Somerset County North 2nd Group 5 Sectional and the District 15 Championships.
Okay, so now we have the first.
Can I just make a comment? So Kayla mentioned the book that was published by Adnan Contractor, Banana Physics. So it is a nonfiction book. I looked it up. It's on Amazon. I plan on reading it because it's like, I guess, physics for dummies. I believe he addresses 10 concepts of physics in terms of like monkeys and bananas, something I think I could understand. So I think it'll be interesting. I'm just so impressed that this young man did that.
I think there could be a board book group around that book.
Yeah, to have the idea and to,
Board goal.
to write this book while a student. I'm just, congratulations. It's just a wonderful
It is pretty
achievement.
Thank you. Anybody else? All right, we have the first opportunity for public comment. Oh, great. All right, seeing none, we will go to board discussion. So the first on the agenda of board discussion are the board goals, which we're gonna try to adopt at the next meeting. In your drives, right, there's the 2019 BOE
Yes, I did
retreat
Oh,
documents. So we are supposed to be looking at what?
you know what? I guess we didn't put hard copies in the.
Yeah, but if you go on,
They're actually
There's a
attached to the
draft.
notes, and there's a draft. Yes.
yeah.
They were also
board
at the
goal
end of the
action
notes.
plans. So the first board goal, and then the action plan is, there's one board goal, and there's an action plan associated with that, and then there's a second board goal and action plan with that. So I think what we were looking for is if there's any type of, you know, if people want to discuss it now, or if they don't have anything to say now, at least provide some sort of feedback prior to April 2nd, if possible, so that we can come on April 2nd and actually adopt them.
These
Does
are for the
anybody have
remainder.
any issues now that they want to talk about?
These are for the remainder of 1819, correct?
Correct.
Right. Yeah, that's what I was gonna ask, so.
But that's essentially it, this document is what
Yes,
we need
yep,
to be
that's
looking at.
exactly it.
Okay.
And
All
I
right.
think it says 1819, right?
Yeah, well, because your
Okay, good.
timelines
Making
and
sure.
your action
Oh, up top, I
plan,
have 1819.
yeah, and your timelines and your action plan go to basically July 2019, so that would be. Yeah. Okay.
You're up, Tim.
Okay. Okay, here we are. Part 2 or part 3. For our student members, there's going to be a quiz on this tomorrow, so you better pay attention. So, last we spoke, we had not gotten our state aid, we had not gotten the allocations, and that's just what I'm going to go over. I'm going to go over the state aid numbers, actually a little bit of the state aid and how they calculate and what we really should be getting versus what we actually do get, and also the regional allocation, how that works, taxes, and what we're planning to do with the additional funding. So, got that one. So just a kind of a brief overview of the state aid components. There's transportation aid, special ed aid, and security aid. They're based on enrollment numbers for each of those programs, though the security aid is a little convoluted, but the other two are pretty simple. Transportation, number of students you transport, and special ed, number of special ed students times a specific number, and that's kind of how they figure that out. Some districts get equalization aid, which we never see. It's something that has to do with an adequacy budget. An adequacy budget is essentially what the state considers an adequate budget to be based on fictitious, I call them fictitious, but it is a specific number per student in each category. We are generally over the adequacy budget. And then they compare that to something called, it's an income factor, so it's the ability to pay. So, you know, that number for us is always very high. If you can imagine the three towns, Long Hill, Warren, and Watchung, we're basically the old IJ district, meaning more wealthy district. That number is generally high. So just to give you numbers of to where those are on the state aid documents, our adequacy number is about 24 million. That's the lowest we can go with our tax levy to support this budget. Usually, you know, that's something we really couldn't sustain based on the amount of state aid we get. The other figure, the ability to pay, the one I talked about before, that number is calculated, it's based on income and household income and property value. That number's 44 million. So if the adequacy number was higher than that ability to pay number, you would get this equalization aid. We're never even close to that, so. And typically your old IJ districts aren't. Usually that's districts in need. Adjustment aid was something that they had, and it was kind of a bad idea because it's come back to haunt some of these districts, but it's essentially hold harmless aid during a time when they really weren't funding the formula. They were keeping everything level, and that was a problem for some now. And that when they were getting this adjustment aid, when they started funding the formula again, they lost that adjustment aid. And I live in one of those towns, Hillsborough. They lost $500,000 this year, and it's just based on they had that adjustment aid and then they lost it. Essentially, they're not holding the district's harmless anymore. The extraordinary aid is something that we calculate based on special education applications and a cost over a certain level, depending on if you send them to private schools, public schools. There's a factor in there, and they give you a percentage of that amount of dollars. It's not a definite thing that you're going to get. Although, I can tell you in 20 years, I've never seen us not get it. And that's not only here, but other districts. So it's something, you know, I budget 50% of that number, kind of hedging my bets, because they can always say, we're not going to fund that. So that's the categories of aid. And this is the actual calculation. So if you go strictly by the numbers of our students, and you calculate our aid, our total amount is $2.5 million. And the actual aid given is $1,589,000. Now, about 10 years ago, we were at $1.6 million, and we lost quite a bit when Governor Christie took office, and it kind of has been edging up ever since. But right now, with the additional aid we received this last week, we're at $1.5 million. So the logical question is, what happened? Where's our money? So if you go by the formula and what they actually calculate, we should be getting $1 million more. We should get $1,073,000, that number right there. That's the difference between what they calculated and what we actually got last year. And how they came to the $139,000 is, statewide, that differential for all districts is $2.1 billion. So our percentage of that entire shortage is 0.049%. And then the state funds available, based on the new funds provided by the governor, and the reductions to those other districts who lost that adjustment aid number, comes to $282 million. And you just simply multiply that small percentage times that $282 million, that's where you get the $139,000 more. So if the state had the money, we would get $900,000 more than what we got now. But the bottom line is they don't have the money, so we get less, and that's how it works. But that's why usually I complain every year, like we should be getting more. If they funded the formula properly, they haven't, so.
Question? So, obviously, according to that, we're $1 million underfunded. But prior to S1 going into effect, we were even significantly more underfunded. And the plan.
That's a while ago.
Well, but I mean, we've been
Yes.
several million underfunded every year
Yes.
for the past several years. Oops.
Did that get unplugged?
No, the battery's running low.
No,
No,
it wasn't.
the switch is off on the strip.
Oh, the power strip is on,
okay.
There we go. I
So-
I thought it meant Tim's battery was running low.
And,
That too.
and given the plan is to ultimately, fund the formula fully, we've seen now 2 years of state aid increases. Now, I know we can't go to the bank on that, but at the same time, it seems to be that they're heading in a direction of trying to normalize that funding level back to where it was. Is that a fair assumption?
That's Senator Sweeney's position. That's what he wants to do. I hope they do that. That would be great. They're getting there. They're actually going in the right direction for us. I guess that number 4 is kind of the key. State funds available. That's what's always going to drive it. I mean, that's always going to be the issue. So we'll see. So administratively, what we did is we got together, we got an additional $139,000. I also put down in the additions a reduction of state tuition. We had one student in a state facility, and when the state aid was downloaded, that was no longer there, so meaning apparently that student's not there. That's kind of offset on the other side, where I got a notification from the Middlesex Vocational School saying, you don't have one student coming next year, you have 2. So that kind of offset that. In fact, the VOTEC one was a little bit higher, but either way, it's about the same. So with the other items, and I know Greg will talk a little bit about this with the operations committee, what we talked about. We just looked at items on our budget that were cut, and then we reinstated the things that we needed the most in the budget. So one of those items, we originally had it listed as 20,000, but we did we had some discussion with our arts folks, and the band uniforms, if you buy the entire uniform, it's it's roughly $50,000, $500 per student. They had gone a little lower. It was a different type of uniform, but theirs was going to require a commitment every year, which we were a little bit unsure of, meaning they would have to get new shirts every year, and we were kind of like, you know what, we'll commit to the full uniform, and then if there's some other, if you guys want to use different shirts every year, then that's something maybe you can support with your boosters, but we'll commit to the full uniforms. And it's been over 10 years, guys, for the band uniforms, and they're wool and they're tough. The music inventory storage unit, we had it budgeted for $9,000. It's really not appropriate. When we looked at it again, we had, we were using more or less a file cabinet type storage. That's not really appropriate for what they do. Each musical score has every instrument. It's about this thick and it's a large box. Sheet music is not small. It's not your standard 8.5 by 11. So they need some type of inventory system because it really looks, it's very sloppy in there, it's all over the place, and it's very difficult for them. So we kind of looked at it a little further. We came up with a $24,000 unit, and it's 4 large cabinets that are roughly 6 foot tall, probably about the size of 2 of those tables. It's pretty large. So it's something that kind of helps them, and that's something we saw as a need. I already mentioned the student from the VOTEC. We had 18 smart boards in our original budget. We cut it to 10 because of budget. So we added 6 back. I couldn't get all 8. The smart boards are used by the teachers. It's something that works real well. Right now we have 72 of them. So we're looking to add 16. There are still a number of classrooms that do not have them. As a matter of fact, there are some that have the old technology, which we really would like to replace them in those. And then the last piece is linking most of our interior doors that aren't on the fire alarm system right now that remain closed. And what we want to do is have them open during the day, and if the fire alarm trips, then they close, which is what it's supposed to do. Right now, they have to stay closed per fire code, and they're the older models. And the problem with that is the students, when you have that many students going through these doors every day, it's bam, 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 and they're whacking these doors. And the doors, and there's just a lot of kids, and it's a lot of a lot of passings through the day, so those doors take a beating, so we're constantly replacing parts. So allowing us to have that open magnetically and wiring it into the fire alarm system keeps us in compliance and saves the doors. That's the idea. And that cost us $35,000. So we, as the committee, talked about this, and Greg will expand on it a little further. There was a thought process of including all these items in the budget, and it remains at 2%, the budget cap. Or the committee suggested maybe we should look at taking half of these, half of the dollars, and putting it back for tax relief. So that was a discussion we had at the Operations Committee. We didn't come to a conclusion. The budget you have in front of you is the first, all these items in that budget. So nothing's been cut from the budget in front of you, the proposed budget. But the Operations Committee wanted to have that discussion here.
None of these items have been cut, but there were original items that were cut from our original budget.
Correct.
We just added some back in.
Yeah, so these are all added into the budget right now. And this is the total budget with all those items in it. Our total operating budget is at 0.95% over last year. We did, and I mentioned it before at the last meeting, we did get a break with our health benefits. Our health benefits are close to flat, which is a good thing, and allowed us to do other things within the budget. But that's salary and benefits we have at 1.8%. That's increase. That's very good. You can see the operations items are at 3%, and that's some of those things you see added in the budget that are things that we usually kick to the side, but we're able to do because we got the savings in health benefits. And then across the board, you can see our capital outlay. We do have a large project this year, which we used capital reserve to fund a large part of that. That was our Gym 7-8 locker room, which is about to get underway in about a month, about 2 weeks. So anyway, our overall budget is $42.6 million. It's 0.95% increase. The other piece that we get from the state is the allocation formula. The allocation formula basically takes our tax levy and divvies it up amongst the 3 towns. And that number changes every year based on regional enrollment versus elementary enrollment and the change in equalized values of the homes. So I did a comparison of the changes for each of the towns the last year according to the state. And the big number that kind of jumps out at you is with Watchung. Their numbers compared to the other 2 towns goes up higher in both the enrollment category and the valuation. So that caused an increase in their portion of our tax levy of 2.29%. And it dropped a little bit in Long Hill, 1.5%, and a little less than 1% in Warren. That happens every year. It swings back and forth. The town that has the plus never likes it. The town with the negative says, oh, that's good. So it's kind of the way it goes every year. It is a state formula. It is not a Watchung Hills formula. It's not a Tim Stides formula, I promise you that. I mean, the enrollment piece is a little rough. That's tougher because student counts can change from time to time, and I understand why they do it mathematically, I get it, but that does cause changes, it does, and I think it's a little tough when I have to sit up here and explain, well, tax increase for this town is this, and this town got more, so it's never a pleasant conversation when we go to that township, but anyway, but that's the formula. So with that, the tax impact on the average home for Warren with this current budget is $36 for the average home, and that average home is $743,000. If you look at the tax impact per 100,000, it's $5.15. That's an annual number. In Long Hill Township, it's an actual decrease for the average home of $504,000 of $49. It's a decrease in taxes. And in Watchung Borough, the average home of $714,000 it's an increase of $281. So, and that you can see the impact of that formula that I talked about right there. And that's basically it. You want questions? Should I sit down? Should I stay up? However you guys want to do it.
I think you can sit down. So how come the 139,510 comes out to be the difference in the estimated state aid 2019-20 proposed budget under the special education aid? How come that's the same amount of money?
For state aid?
Yeah, because I guess when we got the new state aid, was it special education aid that we got?
No.
Additionally-
The increase in the special education aid was what took place over the summer.
Oh, okay.
So that had already been included in the budget that I
So
presented.
this document right here is without the new information or with?
When what Rita's looking at is, I had analysis of state aid this year versus last year. The 2018-19 aid, when we did the budget last year, was $1.4 million without that SDA assessment. They had given us the $224,000 additional special education aid in July.
Okay. And that's the one we put into the cap?
Well, the board,
What do we do?
It
Where do
just-
we
Put
put
it into the budget, and we were gonna discuss it at the end of the year.
No,
it
we
lapsed
put-
into surpluses, basically.
Surplus,
We didn't
remember?
use it, right,
Couldn't use it.
right.
Sure.
So that's in surplus.
Well, it's sitting in a revenue account. In other words, you budgeted 0, you got 224 at the end of the year, it's gonna go theoretically into surplus, is how it
Okay.
works.
If you don't spend it.
Does that make sense?
Yes.
It's gonna go into surplus, or is it gonna go into next year's budget relief?
Theoretically, it goes, it doesn't.
Whatever we decide.
Whatever.
Whatever
Yeah, it goes
we
into,
decide.
right.
So that 224 from last summer remains unexpended.
Correct.
Correct.
So we've got the 224 from last summer that remains unexpended, and then 140 or 139 new.
Correct.
But the 224, we can't do anything with this year.
That's
Because we
correct.
had to make
Yeah,
that
because-
decision in August.
Right, I would have had
This
to,
year.
I would have had to appropriate it in August or July, whenever that meeting was. And then.
And then you
we
found
just-
the money somewhere else to do what you wanted to do.
Yeah, well, we
we
deferred a
still spent
maintenance
it, we just-
project that we didn't want to do
Okay.
at that point in time.
Okay.
But it could be utilized as part of next year's budget.
Well, it's included in the state aid for 2019-20. That number's already in there. It's not in 18-19's, but it's part of our 19-20 state aid base. Does that make sense?
Okay,
It
so.
gets confusing when you're talking about the 2 years.
Well, no, I mean, I understand that it's in the base.
Right.
You're talking about the 224 that we put into surplus. I
Yes.
think Bob's asking if that can
Oh.
be used next year, how that can be used.
Well,
we
it can, yes. Like
So we got 224 that last summer that went into surplus. Then we got another 224 that was baked for this year.
Right.
For the upcoming year, for use in the 1920, that is baked into the budget. So there's still 224 that we haven't allocated.
Correct.
Correct.
And then there's 140, which is, or 139, which is what we just got, which was over and above
What we
what was
expected.
planned.
Correct.
So theoretically, there is that 224 that could be used in some way in application to the budget we're now contemplating.
Yeah, what would happen is, in June, what we'll do is, we get to a point when there's anticipated surplus, we will put money into reserves, our various reserves. We put it into tuition reserve in the past, capital reserve, and maintenance reserve, so we can do that.
You can't encumber.
No, I can't. That ship
You
is sailed.
can't say that we can use it for those things that you just put up on there,
Correct,
when I say encumber.
right,
But I
correct.
think, however we decide to allocate that 224,000 is going to affect the last page of the tax levy increase for the different districts, is that correct?
You're talking about
For
last year's
next year?
224?
For next year, for this budget that you're proposing. If we choose to use that 224,000 as tax relief, it would basically offset these increases to the districts, correct or no?
Well, it's kind of getting way ahead of yourself. I mean, there's a lot of things that have to happen for that. You have to go through the audit, you have to get your numbers down of what is
Because
available.
it's in surplus. You have to make sure you don't have a need for it. Like
I-
the roof falling.
Yeah, it's hard for me to tell you one way or the other what we're going to do with it. I don't know yet. I'll know in June, I'll know a little bit better, or late May. But theoretically, that could happen. Theoretically, we could use it for something, I don't know. Not in the 18-19 budget. We can't do that.
Why can't we do it for the 18-19 budget?
We would have had to appropriate it
Last year.
last summer.
That was the August,
Yeah, it's for this.
in
that's the
August,
end
we
of-
had
I
this
know it's for
conversation.
this year, but I still don't understand why we couldn't use it.
When we
for-
got it, they said we had to encumber it by August, and we had to vote to encumber it by August.
Okay, so
Spend
why
it or
would we
save it?
ever get to use it then?
We can use it,
We
for-
still
it's in
receive.
surplus if something falls.
Essentially, just, if you look at any revenue, like if I budget for $100,000 of revenue,
Right,
we get 200,000, we are 100,000 up. That becomes part of surplus.
to do what with?
Number of things. Number one, it can go for tax relief. It could also go into a reserve account for capital projects, for tuition projects.
Rainy day fund.
That's essentially it.
So at what point do we make that decision?
June.
this year.
June.
We're not allowed
It has to be June.
Has to be June.
So we have to pass the budget before we can figure that out.
Okay.
So
Right.
you gotta kinda put that on the side.
But that's not going to impact, directly the 1920 budget, that 224. Indirectly, down the road it may, but not
You
now.
can't count on it.
Right. Not directly, I just, that clear, it's part of
But there,
surplus.
but there,
And what we
there,
decide to do with it, it could be a lot of different things, right? Tonight, I'm
It's
not.
part of surplus,
Right, that's correct.
so
it
it's
could-
there.
It could help us next year. You don't know. We're not going to know until later in the year.
And the choices that you guys put down, if you look at tab, I just wanna be clear. I'm looking at the tab, summary budget tab, summary by expenditure type, the pie you have there,
Yes.
is that all you have all these categories? So there's certain things that we're adding it, you're putting it in for like buildings and operations maintenance, right? You're using it, you're saying that's
well-
one of the expenditures.
Right.
Supplies, textbooks, and miscellaneous, I guess like those kind of two pie chart things.
Correct,
Where
yeah.
are you looking?
I'm
She's
looking
looking at the
on
summary.
in the big budget, summary by expenditure type. And it's like a teal tab.
It's the third tab in, I think, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Third tab.
Okay.
So, right, because I always look at it as like, so salaries and benefits, we can't do anything with, that is what it is, right? Debt service, you can't really do anything with, transportation, you can't do anything with, special ed tuition, you can't do anything with, grants, I don't think you can, I don't really know about that, capital outlay. So buildings, operations and maintenance, and supplies, textbooks and miscellaneous are sort of the discretionary.
That's fair to say.
And so that's why, when I look at that, that's what I feel like we're, like in there, we're saying, okay, there's some things we wanna do in there. We've got this $139,000. Let's do the things that are on the bucket list or on the list of priorities, the priority list.
It's just things that we've deferred. We generally deferred over
Okay.
the years.
We all smell something burning, do you?
Yeah.
To me, it smells like kind of like a fireplace kind of.
Yeah. Like wood burning.
check the connections underneath you guys, I don't smell anything.
It wouldn't smell like wood, it'd smell like plastic.
Hey, Nick, can you
Maybe
check
it's
that
your
out?
passion about the budget.
Or my anger over watching.
We'll have,
I didn't want to say that.
Could just be someone burning
Yeah,
wood.
Nick's
we'll
gonna
have
check
that
it
checked out there, Barry.
It could be, it could be.
Where were we?
Building.
Smells like a cap-
No, I was just trying to figure out where,
Right, you smell it?
in the pie, where the expenses are, the recommended expenditures are coming out of which portions of this pie.
Well, the band uniforms would be in the instructional co-curricular area.
So supplies, textbooks, and miscellaneous.
Right, and then the music inventory would be the same thing. Smart boards would be the same, although they're technically equipment, but they would be in that category. And the final thing would be in B and G, building and ground operations.
Okay.
So most of the items were within the instructional area, and then the one
Right.
thing is the, yeah.
Okay. Oh, go ahead.
So I don't know if now is appropriate time to summarize our discussion at the Operations Committee, but before I do that, a little bit of background. So if you remember this past summer, there was a fair amount of contentious debate about the surprise $224,000, and it was, do we spend it by the deadline, or do we not, and then decide what to do with it later? If you recall, there were a couple of votes in which different people were present at different meetings, but not the whole group, and ultimately it was decided that we would put it aside so that the whole group could decide how to allocate that money rather than spending it. At the time, there were budget items that we were interested in spending it on, and money was found elsewhere to be able to accomplish that. So that's that 224. We then get a budget that's created based on what we know now, and then an additional 139 plus 4,000 and change is found surprisingly on top of that. And so the committee discussion, which was not a consensus recommendation, but basically different opinions about that information, was to either allocate it for things that were on the cut list that now were high enough priority to move to fund, or to return half of that to the taxpayers and fund half of it, or to return all of it to the taxpayers, which was part of the discussion we had with the 224, where there was really no consensus, and so that just got kicked to the subsequent year. So I think what I personally would do, and I'd ask Ms. Ober, Mr. Hunsinger, who was at the meeting, and Mr. Fallon obviously is not here for this one, but either Ms. Ober or I can speak to his thoughts, is how do we allocate new money that's found? So if as a group we are allocated an amount of money, we create a budget around that money, and then there's new money found, do you spend it? Do you put it in capital reserve? Do you return it to the taxpayers, or some permutation thereof? One of the things that was of concern raised at our meeting was what happens to your base, because obviously if you return some of it, your base is lower, and so for future years, you're starting at a lower number. That being said, the amount of money that we're talking about is not very large in proportion to what our budget is, so does it really impact the base that much? I'll let you decide. We've decided to fund a lot of things from capital reserve over the past year, and so our capital reserve has dwindled down, and if I'm not mistaken, I think we're going to be down to $500,000 in the capital reserve.
After the referendum, I think.
After the referendum. And we've been higher than that. So an argument could be made to put all of this money into capital reserve to build that back up again, so that we're not in a pinch at some point in time when something fails, when something breaks, when a roof starts to leak and needs to be replaced unexpectedly, that we're able to do that within our capital reserve without asking for more money. So that was the essence of our discussion, and there were feelings in every direction as to what to do, and it was the opinion of our committee that it should be a full board discussion to decide how to spend this. I will now leave it up to the group to talk about it before I give my personal thoughts on it.
Susan, did you want to?
Well, I don't really view this as newly found money. I mean, when Tim made the budget presentation a couple weeks ago, he said, we don't know exactly how much we'll be getting from in-state aid, and we won't know that until whatever the date was, March 2nd. And so I think we were expecting this money. I don't consider this to be found money. My opinion is that it's state aid to be used for education, and I think we should use it for education.
want to be clear, the whole thing with the surplus, whole thing with the capital reserve, that also, that capital reserve, when we had the discussion about the 224, my recall is that one of the reasons why we were thinking about using the 224 in August towards building projects was because you didn't want to touch the capital reserve, right? You didn't want it to go below a certain amount.
Yeah, because I know the referendum discussion
Right.
was coming, yeah.
Right. So, and when we found the money to do whatever you wanted to do, you had to pull it out of capital reserve?
No, we deferred a maintenance
Okay,
project in the.
okay.
yeah,
All right, so
South
that's where I
Kitchen
was,
project.
okay, I just wanted to clarify that in my brain.
Yeah.
Would have been covered by the 220.
So if the referendum does fail, and we would want to still do something in the media center, maybe not as ambitious, maybe we would use the money for that. And so if we went to capital reserve, then it could be used to that purpose. I'm not sure of the timing of it, all this, the
You
referendum.
mean if the
and we make a
139 went into
decision.
the?
So I don't,
Yeah, that's a possibility.
Yeah, it's possible, but I think the first thing you have to find out, the referendum is kind of tied to this. And I think once you send DOE applications down to Trenton and see what they're going to fund, I think that's where the board's has a decision to make. Because again, we'll see if they fund everything, would be great, I hope they do. But that's going to tell you what you're going to need in capital reserve versus,
For
what
the
the state's willing
referendum
to
to
fund.
fail, people would vote on something that's not having a tax impact on
So
them.
the first step is to find out if
But-
it's eligible
but
for the
really,
debt service
but
aid.
that's not-
Then if it is, we
I'm
need the
sorry,
referendum. The step before that is to find out if it's even eligible. We think it's eligible for the debt service aid. That's the first piece. Because if it's not eligible for the debt service aid, that would be the same as the referendum going down, where we're
Yes.
not getting debt service aid, so we need to
Right.
figure out.
Yeah, I think you got to get there first.
Yeah.
so I understand what you're saying, Rita, it's just contingency, if it
Yes.
does, that's all, not whether it's rational or not. But if.
Yeah, because if you don't get, what I'm saying is, you don't get the debt service aid for any part of that project, then
Can't do it.
it's hard, I cannot recommend for you to do that project.
We'd have to, we'd
No,
have to
but
do the
not that
electrical.
project, less ambitious, not that project.
Correct.
because
Yes.
That's my point. So
We would
then-
have to
then-
make
And then at
changes.
$139,000 would
Then
come
it-
handy, right? to- to do
It may,
something.
yes,
All right.
correct.
So was that discussed at the operations committee, putting the 139 into capital?
Not really.
Vaguely, we didn't, it wasn't a proposal that we brought up. Because, don't forget, like I said, in June, we're able to, projected surplus we can put into capital reserve.
Right now on the agenda, it's the budget as is, so we would have to, if we want to make a change, we'd have to move to change the preliminary budget, right?
Correct.
The only thing that I'd like to say, and not to be against Susan, but the only thing that's basically educationally related on that 139,000 would be really the 6 additional smart boards. Those other items are really niceties. And I
You
think,
talked to the band parents, and you used to explain.
well, I understand that, right? No, I understand,
Ask
but,
Bob.
sure, but you could argue that for every sport, every club, everything else there, where that money should go.
And again,
But
you
we are
talked to-
spending money on uniforms for other sports.
Well, wait, the inventory item is,
And a lot.
I think that's an education.
It is,
item,
that's
correct?
for their, yeah. it's
That's for the
their-
music program, that's not for the band per se.
We did discuss keeping half and giving half back.
And in that case, what would we fund and what wouldn't we fund?
Well, I think our recommendation would be, if we were to cut items from this list, would be the smart boards, and the fire door, the linking the doors to the fire alarm.
And
Those
when
are
you
the
say
two
giving
items.
money back, what do you mean?
We had discussed giving half of the money back to the taxpayers.
And how would
Tax
that
relief.
benefit education?
Meaning cutting the budget, Susan.
I understand. How would that benefit education or benefit our students?
It wouldn't, it'd buy you a tiny bit
So
of
isn't
goodwill
that
because it'd
sort
be
of-
about $2 a taxpayer, but.
Well, so is that our role, or is our role to
No,
benefit
but
our
every
Our
students?
goal
time-
is to be
No, but every
fiscally
time.
responsible.
Is
every
that our
time we
role,
get-
or is our role to benefit the
Yes.
students?
No, the role is to be fiscally responsible.
Then I think we
and
disagree
educate
on
the
what our role
students
is.
To the best of the ability. A lot of these are niceties, they're not must-haves.
Every time we get excess money, or found money, as you want to call it, the discussion is, do we keep it, do we spend it, do we give it back, do we give a portion of it back? So it's just keeping with that we discussed, maybe spending half, maybe giving half back.
And how would that benefit our students?
It doesn't,
So why would we do that?
because we still work for the taxpayers as well. So people are like, why don't you ever give money back? Well, okay, here's your $2. It doesn't really help anybody.
Because not everybody that voted for us has a student in the district. And you're being voted, or you're gaining support from the constituents in your community, which is a broad gamut of people that you have to be
I think
fiscally
what Bruce
responsible
means
for.
to say, because I don't really think he means to say what he's saying, he means to say that
No.
our responsibility under the School Board of Ethics is, there is a financial responsibility that we have to make sure, but it's not necessarily about getting reelected and taxes and people voting for us because we kept their taxes down. Because ultimately, our responsibility is to the students, but we also have a responsibility to do that in a fiscally responsible way.
And so this is fiscally unresponsible?
That's what, that is it's fiscally unresponsible if it is something that that maybe the students don't necessarily need. Because what is responsibility, fiscal responsibility? I mean, that is probably something that everybody will have a different opinion on. Bob?
I guess so.
So I think maybe to add another piece of context that maybe you weren't here for, was when, what was it, 2 years ago, Mr. Stiles, what was our tax rate, the increase we went up, was it 3?
We went above the 2% cap to 4%.
So,
bank cap.
so we
With bank cap.
went, instead of coming in at 2%, we went way over at 4%, which certainly had some, we had some interesting conversations around that, because, all of a sudden, we're going back to the taxpayer with twice what it was that they would normally have. And part of the discussion that started last summer, again, prior to you being here, with that 244, was centered around, what, we went above because of the extenuating circumstances that we found ourselves in that time. Maybe this is an opportunity to say, let's give the taxpayer a break by returning some of those dollars to them as a little bit of a make-good for going over the last time. So you don't necessarily, I'm not suggesting that you agree with that, but I'm just trying to put into context a little of this historical information that has kind of got us to this point in the discussion.
If I can just add that I do want to clarify that at least, we are the administration that's recommending the budget, that I firmly stand by that what's in the budget are things that we do believe are needed for the students, and there's not frills in the budget. It's based on our strategic plan and what we've prioritized as a school district. So, for example, and not to pick on the band uniforms, but it's a good example to use, it is, we value our co-curricular activities, we value our marching band. In order for them to perform well in competitions, they do need presentation as part of that. So the fact that we have not purchased uniforms for them in 10 years, that is something that we do feel is a priority. We don't feel it's a frill to outfit our students appropriately for the programs that we fund, which are marching band, but we've made a commitment to run those programs, so we need to run them effectively. And if we decide not to do that, then that should be a discussion about that particular program, which is why with the culinary arts room, we had such a robust conversation about that a couple of years ago, because we, had a discussion of, are we going to when we realized we needed to either shut it down or renovate it, are we going to actually make it relevant for 21st century learning and upgrade that learning experience, or are we going to just eliminate the program? And, the board made the commitment to spend the money to upgrade the program, and I think the students have benefited tremendously from that. I know that was not an easy decision for the board, but I think the payoff for the students has been tremendous. So, and of course, it's a discussion in every district of what students need, but I think, our strategic plan and the priorities that we've outlined for our students are how we define the budget. And that's why the strategic plan goals are part of the budget documents that Tim sends out, So anything new in the budget has to be justified with how it aligns to the strategic plan.
So if I could ask you, if we didn't pick up the additional $139,000, would the budget still have found money to fund the band uniforms?
No, it was something that we had cut.
And this whole idea about found money, if Tim would have said, not been as conservative and thought that he was gonna get more state aid than he did, this was already been in the preliminary budget, and we probably would have been not having this discussion.
Right.
That's the other weird thing about this whole thing. I agree with Susan. I don't see it as found money either. I just think it's Tim being conservative and being pleasantly surprised.
But if it didn't come through, he would have had to have a balanced budget minus the $139,000.
Right, and.
Correct.
Correct.
So we would still run a school for $139,000 less.
Maybe. Greg?
So I respectfully disagree, and I make the simple analogy of you have a household budget, you expect to get so much in income and so much in interest and whatever ancillary income that you get, and you make a household budget, and all of a sudden you get a bonus that was unexpected. So this money is found money. It was not expected from the state. It's only because the governor decided he wanted to spend more money towards funding the formula closer to what it's supposed to be rather than what has been historically done. But we created a budget knowing what we would expect to get without that additional goodwill. So the question is, in your family budget, when you get that unexpected bonus, what do you do with it? Well, some people spend it, maybe on a vacation, maybe on a repair that needs to be done. That's the conversation we're having. This is money that we did not budget, that we did not plan to spend, that now we have
We don't give it back to my employer.
to spend. So you can decide to spend it or not spend it. And I mean, ultimately, I think our responsibility is a balancing act, and it's a balancing act of being respectful to the taxpayers that are shouldering the predominant burden of the costs of this school, because we are not fully funded based on what we should be, versus the needs of the school to run it operationally. And in my personal opinion, we already kicked the 224 can into the potential of being capital reserve, because we did not spend it at the time, and instead, when we were having the air conditioning discussion, we looked at a different way to be able to pay for that. In my opinion, this is an opportunity for us to be able to thank the taxpayers for shouldering the burden for the years that they've done so, and sharing a little bit of that extra money with them.
Just another question for Mr. Stiles. The budget that we're looking at currently does not contemplate any breakage?
There was a couple in there, but not the latest ones, no. No, I cut it off
And
at a
how-
certain date.
Just from an understanding, how does that then play in from a planning process as we move from here to finalizing the budget? Because, I mean, we're doing a preliminary budget, but then there's the final budget.
April, yeah.
And my assumption would be that the breakage would factor in sometime between now and when we approve the final budget?
Sometimes I do, sometimes I don't. Depends on the positions, it depends on what the board intends to, or what the administration and board intend to do with those positions. If, for example, first of all, we have to be sure that what we see is going to happen.
Right.
That's number one on the list. The second thing would be certain positions, it's kind of hard to calculate specific breakage because of the nature of the position.
Right.
Like your administrative positions are a little harder because it's rare that you see an administrator come in at BA step 1 or MA step 1, whatever our lowest. I think it's MA step 1. And there are certain teaching positions that are also very difficult to get BA step 1. On the agenda, we have think it's a physics. And physics is extremely difficult to get a BA step one. That's not something, so that's something I have conversations with, like, the left and the right here, and see, what's our plan here, because I kind of have to see on those. There are a few folks that put their notices in earlier that I did capture
So you can,
breakage.
and related to that, because some of the things that we are looking at are, long-serving employees, who even when we find replacements for them, even at a significant experience and certification level, is still gonna be somewhat, there still will be some, difference between the folks just because of their longevity and everything else in the system. And my point for asking is, as we're trying to figure out, how we address, all the options that are in front of us, I'm wondering, has the pencil been sharpened enough to make sure that there isn't any, remaining dollars that could be, brought into the equation that would allow for serving some of these educational needs, while at the same time also trying to find a way to return some of the revenue back to the taxpayers.
It's a very fair question. I don't want to punt it, but I kind of have to punt it. We have to do a little more research on that. It's hard for me to do it now because it's very fresh information that's coming to us, meaning it's literally tonight. So the budget before you I didn't work on those.
Right, we have to pass a preliminary tonight.
Correct, yes.
So if we pass a preliminary tonight, what is our opportunity to make adjustments to that prior to final
You
adjustment?
can, all the way through April 24th, when we do the public hearing. So that the budget goes tonight, is a preliminary, it goes to the county, they review, they may find things, you never know. And then what happens is, then the board on April 24th has the public hearing, and you don't have to pass the budget that we're approving, or that gets approved tonight.
The one thing that I'll just add in terms of the personnel, one of the things we don't budget for, you see that we approve almost on every agenda, leave replacement, maternity leave replacement. And a lot of the time, we're paying two people for the same job because they're taking sick leave or other leave. So we don't budget for all of that happening. So that's, I think, part of the reason, and correct me if I'm wrong, but, when we end up with a little breakage in personnel, it allows us to not get into trouble when things like that come up, which you can see they come up quite a lot on the agenda. So there are things that we, that kind of balance each other out. I'm not saying that if we know we're gonna have a tremendous amount of breakage, that we ignore that and don't put that in the budget, but when it's not, significant, I think that's part of what helps us not ever get into a dire situation where we're running out of money or having to juggle, because we do have a lot of personnel situations, because we have such a large staff, that a lot of that does come up. And we're, and then when we're, especially for some of the harder to find positions, it's just that we end up hiring mid-year at a different level than we expected. So just some of the reasons, to consider with regard to that.
Okay, and my closing board discussion. All right, closing board discussion on the budget. Right now, the way I see it, and correct me if I'm wrong, Mr. Sides, in terms of making motions to change that agenda item, we'll do that when we bring it up as an action item.
Fair enough, works for me.
All right. So, we're now into discussions of addendum items.
Yeah, okay, that's what I was gonna say.
All right, is there any discussion on any of the addendum items? All right, we can start moving the action items.
Madam President, I would like to move items A1 through A6 and A11.
Second.
Any discussion? Roll call, please.
Ms. DeMizio?
Yes.
Mr. Fahey?
Yes.
Mr. Hayek?
Yes.
Mr. Hunsinger?
Yes.
Mr. Martins?
Yes.
Joe Morrison?
Yes.
Mrs. Ober?
Yes.
Dr. Shabilsky?
Yes.
And Ms. Broom?
Yes.
Madam President, I'd like to move items A7 and A10.
A7 through A10.
No, A7 and A10. Or,
Second.
Okay.
I'm sorry, A7 through A10, my mistake. Sorry,
I thought he was pulling it.
you're right.
Second.
There was, but it was part of the
Any
original one.
discussion?
Right, did they move it?
On A7 through A10. Roll call, please.
Ms. DeMizio?
Yes.
Mr. Fahey?
Yes.
Mr. Hayek?
Yes.
Mr. Hunsinger?
Yes.
Mr. Morrison?
Yes.
Mrs. Ober?
Yes.
Dr. Shabilsky?
Yes.
And Ms. Brown?
Yes.
Motion's carried.
Madam President, I'd like to move items C1 through C17.
Second.
Any discussion?
I'd like to just certainly note on C14 and C15, the resignation of our Director of Guidance and our Vice Principal, Terry McConnell. Obviously, both Ms. Lostro and Mr. McConnell have served the district for a extended period of time and done so in a distinguished fashion. Certainly for me personally, it's going to be hard to walk through the building and not see Terry bounding around with a smile and smacking you on the arm and, hey, how you doing? I mean, he's just one of those positive, infectious individuals that has helped define the culture of this school. So I'm personally saddened to see him leave, and same for Ms. Angelastro, but wish them both well in their newfound retirements. Agreed.
Agreed.
Very much.
All right.
We'll still see him at football games and wrestling and basketball.
I'll probably bring the megaphone, too.
All right, roll call, please.
Ms. DeMizio?
Yes.
Mr. Fahey?
Yes.
Mr. Hayek?
Yes.
Mr. Hunsinger?
Yes.
Mr. Martins?
Yes.
Mr. Morrison?
Yes.
Ms. Ober?
Yes.
Dr. Shabilsky?
Yes.
And Ms. Brown?
Yes.
Motion's carried.
I'd like to pull D1 for separate discussion and move items D2 through 23.
Second.
Any discussions on D2 through D23? Okay. Roll call, please.
Ms. DeMizio?
Yes.
Mr. Fahey?
Yes.
Mr. Hayek?
Yes.
Mr. Hunsinger?
Yes.
Mr. Martins?
Yes.
Mr. Morrison?
Yes.
Mrs. Ober?
Yes.
Dr. Shabilsky?
Yes.
And Ms. Brown?
Yes.
Motion's carried.
Madam President, I'd like to move item D24.
Second.
Any discussion? Okay, roll call, please.
Okay, Ms. DeMizio?
Yes.
Mr. Fahey?
Yes.
Mr. Hayek?
Yes.
Mr. Hunsinger?
Yes.
Mr. Morrison?
Yes.
Mrs. Ober?
Yes.
Dr. Shabilsky?
Yes.
And Ms. Brown?
Yes.
Motion's carried.
So with respect to D1, which is their last remaining item, I would make a motion that we fund the band uniforms and music inventory increase. On that list was also the students, the one additional projected student, which is a required item that we need to fund, and that the remaining money out of the $144,000 and change, we return to the taxpayers.
I thought it was 139, I'm confused.
Yeah.
It's 139.5 plus 4,500.
Oh, I
Right.
see what you're saying. Okay.
How much would the remaining money be again?
It would be around 70,000, I think a little bit less than that, if my
That's correct.
quick mental math is correct.
Yes, a little more than 70,000.
Do I have a motion?
Uh,
I need a second of some sort, I think, right?
A second to discuss.
Yeah,
Second, please.
okay. And then we can discuss the motion?
Just a point of clarification. Is there, in regards to any of the breakage dollars or anything that would come up between now and the time the final budget is adopted, would we have the opportunity to also include those funds in relief?
Yeah. That's a possibility, just that we.
I mean, it's, again, I
Well,
mean,
they're
as-
in the, so you mean the
Have
funds
that
are in the budget, we
conversation.
would just reallocate them to other items, is what you're saying? If we have a certain amount slotted for something, and you're saying we realize there's gonna be breakage, we're basically just, the budget is still for the same amount, we're just reallocating that money for something else.
so the breakage is reallocated, but it's not like it could be utilized in relief, as I understand it. As
No,
from what
because
we,
it's in the budget. It's
from what
already-
we would learn between now and then, breakage would only mean how things would shift within the budget. Those dollars wouldn't, we couldn't say, oh, we want to use those for relief to the taxpayer.
Yeah, well, I mean, after the budget's done, or?
No, between now and April 24th, or,
He's saying you find $50,000, can we make what goes back 120?
Yeah, the board can make changes, yeah. The board can make changes.
but that's something that we would have to do at a later time, not as
Correct.
part of this discussion.
That's,
Or we could send none back, correct?
Yeah, between now and then, you could pass this as
Between now and then, you can
preliminary, and
change
the
it,
final
yes.
say, no, I don't really want to do that. Yes, you can do
right,
that too.
you can.
Okay.
We don't have any, I have a question. Do we have any issue that we think the county's not going to approve this budget?
Generally not. They're usually pretty good. I mean, there's nothing in here that's tricky. Usually, when you're over 2%, then they get a little jumpy with it.
Okay.
So, Tim, all these items that are $139,000, could you use the $220,000 that's sitting in reserve to pay for this, for these niceties? And give back the
which res-
Can you,
Are you
$139,000?
talking about-
stop calling them nice.
Well, no, I'm,
They're supplies and
okay, there's
instructional
supplies
items.
for the
If you're referring to capital reserve, no, we can't use capital reserve for these funds, no. For these items, I should say. The only thing you could, it's a stretch, but you may be able to use a maintenance reserve for
The
the
lot.
doors.
The
The door
doors.
project, yeah, because that technically is a maintenance project.
Understood.
And our maintenance reserve is what right now, do you know?
It's not a lot, I think it's $200,000 in that range.
Yeah.
It's kind of weird to say that's not a lot, but
No.
in terms of our
This
entire
building.
budget, relatively speaking, it's not a lot.
Is there anything, is there anything in the budget, as it's currently contemplated, that could be funded out of capital reserves to then free up those dollars for use for instructional materials?
It's hard because the largest one we have in there is the tennis courts. And that, you technically, it's tricky because it's supposed to be an eligible project. And generally, the sports fields are not eligible, so technically, no. The other one, the security thing, we probably could. That's a possibility. I mean, I'm just trying to keep capital reserve where it's at because of the pending referendum project. I don't want to take anything out of capital reserve, although I think we're gonna have a tough time funding that.
So that, and that's where the 224 resides, and that's, so you're saying you would prefer not to touch the 224 that's in capital reserve?
Well, it's not reserved.
It's not in reserve yet.
That will be in
Allocated.
reserve.
We didn't allocate.
Well, if you
I
would,
would-
we decide to
Allocate
put it in
to reserve.
reserve.
Right, I would prefer that we build our current capital reserve even higher.
Yeah, you wanted a
June.
million.
Well, I mean, that was my point. That's why, am I totally off base? You're saying that it's going to be reduced, so why not take the money and put it there? That wasn't even discussed. So what am I missing here?
Well, right now we have a motion on this.
I
If
know,
that
but
fails, you can make a motion to put it in
No,
capital
but again,
reserve.
I just, all right, there was no discussion on, when I brought it up earlier, but now, okay. I don't know
No,
whether.
you can discuss, we can discuss it, but it would have to be a motion that's different than what is being proposed right now.
Well, to answer your question, what we were, it was one of the things that we came up with, is take that $139,000 and put it into capital reserve. And we actually briefly touched on it in operations, but not that much. It's something that we had talked administratively, but, given the items that we have an opportunity to get for students, particularly the band uniforms, the music inventory, those kind of things, we've been pushing off for so long that we just kind of felt strongly that those were more important at this point in time. And then I can you know, when June comes around, we'll have a few extra bucks that we can put into capital reserve to help us with the upcoming referendum. That's why, but it's only because the items on this list, we felt that strongly about to put them in, because we felt, you know, again, I understand we have enough smart boards, but it's not in every classroom, and we would like to have them in every classroom. This doesn't even give us that, and they're valuable. So these items are all very important things to us. That's to answer your question. It wasn't, we didn't take it lightly. We just, you know, we think these things are necessary. They're not niceties there, Bruce.
All right, they're not niceties, but I'm just gonna say, and really, I don't know why I'm arguing this, because really, Greenbrook just pays the tuition. I think I'm lobbying for all the other districts.
That's true.
You know, I'm being
I'll
honest
send you
here.
a separate bill.
Okay, so any more discussion on the motion?
So to clarify, we're gonna be voting on Dr. Shabilsky's,
Motion to change.
okay, got it.
Yeah, that, just so you guys know, that lowers the tax levy to 31,668,863. Excuse me.
31 million.
The only thing I was going to say on that is, you know, if it's $70,000, and in the overall scheme of Watchung Hill's budget, it's peanuts, and in 6 months or whenever, we're gonna go out for a referendum, I think that's a great gesture towards the taxpayer, who you're gonna ask to support the school once again with another referendum.
That's not a tax increase, though. The referendum is not a tax increase.
You are correct, it's not a tax increase, but it's a capital reserve decrease. And so ultimately, in the future, it is a potential tax increase when we need to fund something that we don't have the money for.
That's not necessarily true, Greg.
Well, you're entitled to your opinion. You know, we have a referendum coming up. We've, I think, been very thankful to the taxpayers for supporting things that we have asked them for over at least my tenure at this board, as well as the K-8 board. I think we have an opportunity to have a goodwill gesture that, as has been pointed out, is a fairly small proportion of our $46 million budget. And I would advocate that this be supported.
All right, roll call.
Okay. Excuse me. Ms. DeMizio.
No.
Mr. Fahey.
Yes.
Mr. Hayek.
Yes.
Mr. Hunsinger.
Yes.
Mr. Martins.
No.
No, it's on Greg's budget, you know.
We're talking about the motion of returning all but the 50,000 band uniforms and 15,000 music inventory to the taxpayer
Yeah.
and the additional student.
Yes.
Sorry, I didn't think you understood that.
No, that was, I got at least, I got everybody going here, I'm trying to.
Okay, Mrs. Ober,
No.
Dr. Shabilsky,
Yes.
and Ms. Brown.
Yeah, Mr. Morrison
Did
first.
you get to vote? You're
Oh, I'm sorry,
discounted.
Bob. I apologize.
Yes.
Mr. Morrissey.
Yes.
Sorry about that. Geez, I looked right at it, too. And Ms. Brown.
No.
Okay, we need 6 votes. So that's a 5-4, so that is not a passing vote.
That was a 5.
I thought that was
No,
six.
1, 2, 3,
There was six.
4,
There's six.
5, 6.
1, 2, 3.
It's 6-3, there's 9 of us here.
6-3.
Lisa's a no.
Bruce was yes.
Oh, Bruce is a yes.
Yes.
I'm sorry, because you were just said no. My apologies. That motion passes then. Because that's 6. Good.
You just made our media correspondents very happy by that.
I apologize.
Me too, because if it didn't pass, I was like, oh, no.
So I would move the amended D1. We essentially voted on a motion to make a change.
Yeah, so, right.
Oh,
So
okay.
now I'm moving
Yeah,
to
Yep,
Just put D1 on.
D1 as amended.
right.
Second.
Just parliamentary procedure,
Got, yeah,
Mr. Stubbs.
gotcha.
Any
You got me
discussion?
all lost.
No.
Okay. So now you're actually voting on this budget?
Yes.
Now we're voting it as amended
Correct.
preliminarily.
Okay, Mr. Mizio,
No.
Mr. Fahey,
Yes.
Mr. Hayek,
Yes.
Mr. Hunsinger,
Yes.
Mr. Martins,
Yes.
Mr. Morrison,
Yes.
Mrs. Ober,
No.
Dr. Shabelski,
Yes.
and Ms. Brown.
No.
Okay, that motion does carry. 6-3.
Okay. Second opportunity for public comment. Okay.
With the new budget number going back to the taxpayers, how much is that per capita?
$2.
Oh, man.
Can you do that?
It's,
It's $2 for the whole thing, right?
yeah,
No.
it's essentially, I did a quick break. It's approximately $3 differential for each of the towns. So it's, you subtract $3 from each of those, but I'll give you guys the actual numbers. It's very close to $3, because I did each of the towns. I think one of the towns, Long Hill was like $2.27, one was $3.13, one was $3.27.
So Washington's only gonna go $235.
$277.
I mean, $277.
Yeah, I'll give you the updated numbers, but it's $3 differential for each town. I'll send you guys.
You can write us a check.
I have one unrelated comment. Did you know that,
Wait, I have to
We're
close
still in public comment.
first.
okay,
I'm fighting for everything.
Any other public comment? All right, I'll close it. Other business.
Julia Cunningham, who left here, graduated last year and went to Princeton,
Yeah.
they won the Ivies, and they're now in the NCAA tournament.
Yeah, seated 11. Cool.
And she had the three-point shot
did.
that put them up with the biggest lead of the
She
game.
was scoring like a mad woman.
Yeah, yeah, that was great. Madam President?
Are you on we're on other business?
Yes,
right?
please.
Yep.
Again, I want to bring up the issue of the pilots. That's, the discussion that's going on related to the pilots with the differing towns that we have. Again, this is a, somewhat of a controversial topic across the state. There's a lot of information out there, but not a lot of facts regarding, what are the obligations of towns to share the portion of the pilots with the district. And given the strenuous discussion that we had here this evening about taxes and revenues and everything else, I would like to see us put in place some sort of strategy to begin discussing the pilots with our sending districts to make sure that we have adequate access to the funds that should be going to students that are going to be residing in those particular developments when they are established. So,
So we could put it on board discussion for next time, because that suggests to me that the board president needs to kind of create some sort of committee or something.
Correct.
Well, could that be related to the shared services discussions, since he's meeting with them anyway, or no, it's too big
it's
a-
two different things,
I know
because
it's two different things, but he's meeting with them.
he's not meeting with the municipalities.
I thought you wanted, all right.
Yeah.
I thought you wanted to get together districts.
No, I mean, this
sending
is
districts.
related to the
I understand that, but I
municipalities.
thought you
But it
wanted
would
to
make
put together some
It's
kind of a
all up in the air
lobbying.
because none of these may be built. Who knows?
But we all have the same issue. All
Right.
towns have the
Right.
same issue.
But I think that if we put it on board discussion and the board president thinks it's appropriate to create some committee, then the committee can meet and like discuss how's the best way to go about this. Do we put it in shared, is it something that we need to talk about in a shared committee, shared services as Long Hill, Warren, Watchung,
Right.
and us,
School
and Greenbrook
districts.
all together, get together and go to, or each, like, how are we going to do it? But we need a committee to, I think we need the board president, we need a discussion and create a committee and then figure out an action plan.
Yeah, and I'm not advocating for a committee or a structure or anything else. I'm
Yeah.
just advocating that,
For a discussion.
that we keep this on our radar screens before it gets away from us. And then we don't have, then the money's gone and we can't do anything. The other item I wanted to bring to the board's attention is that on April 3rd, 2019, I believe at 6 PM, in the Performing Arts Center, the Watchung Hills will be hosting, on behalf of the Somerset County School Boards Association, our Unsung Heroes event. Unsung Heroes is a recognition ceremony that recognizes an individual from each of the 12 high schools in the Somerset County area who goes above and beyond within a school, but does not have the opportunity to be recognized in traditional means because it's not part of an existing club or it's not part of some sort of other activity that they're involved in, but a way to make sure that students that may otherwise fly under the radar of recognition have the opportunity to be recognized. All 12 districts had to submit their nominations by the 15th of March, so those are in, but we expect to have about 100 people from across the county, school board members, superintendents, and others on that night. You're all invited to attend because we will be honoring someone from Watchung Hills, and if you're interested in attending, please let Mr. Stiles know as soon as possible because he has to submit the RSVPs on our behalf.
Thank you.
Ms. Jewett, is there, or Mr. Stiles, anything you have to add to that?
No, we're looking forward to the event. It should be a
It's
nice
gonna be great.
event.
Yeah.
And we think our students will be catering it, so our
Yes, we
culinary club.
get to show off our culinary arts students.
And our pack?
And our pack.
Any other business? All right.
Second.
All right.
This will be a quiet motion.
Thank you.